Hey there everybody, and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. In this one we're going to be making a procedural Lego, which is useful if you want to take your mesh and convert it into Legos, which is a thing we're going to be doing. But first, we need to make a Lego block that can be made to any scale. So here's a 1x1, a 2x1, a 3x2, anything you want. And of course, most importantly, it has the pegs to connect. So if you wanted to take one of these, duplicate it, move it upwards, and like shift it over by like a peg or so, they technically fit and all this. So if you're interested in this, watch the tutorial. If you're not, watch the tutorial. Let's begin. So all of this is going to be in geometry nodes. So I'm going to take everything and delete it, add in a cube. Why did we delete the cube? Because the people like it. And for the cube, we are going to make it a geonodes group and delete the group input. So we have a invisible cube with a geometry nodes modifier. Now, if you think about it, what a Lego piece is it's a block with a cylinder punching out of it and the cylinder kind of booleaned into it, right? So it needs to have a peg coming out and a slot for a peg. In other words, it's a cube and a cylinder, long story short. So I'm going to start off with a cube as our primitive, and we want to take this and make it kind of shallower, something like 0.25. And the number you pick for this doesn't really matter, but we want to be consistent since we're going to be doing some math with this. So let it be 0.25. The next thing we want to do is we want to put a cylinder here going upwards. So what we can do is we can literally just add in a cylinder, super simple modeling. We join these together. And I want the cylinder to first of all be tinier, so I'm making the radius smaller, but I want it to be on the surface normal of the top of this, okay? To do this, first of all, I'm going to make the thing smaller, so let's go into wireframe so we can see. I'm making the depth less, so if we had it at 0.25, should our block be taller? Should it be 0.5? No, 0.25. So if our block's 0.25, I'm going to have this be half the depth. And I'm going to transform this upwards so that when we have our cylinder, it's kind of on the origin instead of centered. So I'm just going to move it up by, it should be 0.25 divided by 2. Okay? So we have a cube and we have a cylinder that we're joining together. So again, we took our cylinder, we shifted it up so it's resting on the floor. This is going to be useful for us in a moment. And I'm going to transform this upwards again by 0.125, okay? So now we have one resting on top of the other. Quick thing, we want it to kind of be the right size, so I'm just kind of playing with this. I think 0.3 looks a bit tiny. 0.33333, a third, does seem to look correct. And I don't want to just join them. I want them to be one mesh so that we can manipulate it and stuff like this, run a bevel. So instead of just joining them, I'm going to run a union, a mesh boolean set to the union operation, and I'm going to join these together. And now what you're going to see with the union is it actually creates geometry that makes sense. It's going to connect these. Why does this matter? It matters because when we want to run a bevel on it, again, it's going to actually like do it in a way that makes sense. So you can see we get those nice edges. If we did not use a mesh boolean, but instead we just joined them, they just kind of like sit on top of each other. But with the union, it looks nice and smooth. Okay, the cylinder, I'm going to give it more divisions. And now we need to do the same thing, but for the bottom with a, not a union, but what is it called? A difference. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it to difference, and now we need the cylinder to be shifted down to the bottom of the block. So I'm going to run another transform. This time, instead of plus 0.125, I'm going to do minus 0.125. So it's going to be sitting down here, and that should be correct. Let's see. So we take this, we subtract away our new mesh. Oh, by the way, first of all, this should be in the first slot. So this goes in the first slot, this goes in the second slot, and that seems to be correct. Okay? Again, we get these nice bevels as a result of all of this being Boolean operations. And at any point, you can kind of change the depth of this, which is going to change how far up this goes and how far extruded inwards it goes. So something like this is fine. And we can control stuff like the number of pegs, so that we can make like weird Legos and stuff like this. Okay, so this is what it looks like in wireframe mode. It's a very nice mesh. The next thing we want to do is we want to take this block and make it loopable in a sense. So instead of a 1x1, I want a 2x1, a 3x1, etc. What we know is that the dimension on the x and y axis is 1. How do I know this? Because we started off with a cube that is 1x1, and then it has some height. So what we can do is we can make a line object. A line object has the property that if we like move it on the x-axis and we set this to offset, we're going to have 10 points, each one unit apart from each other. So we have 1 here, move 1 to the x, 2, 3, and we can control the number of points. And on each of these, we're going to spawn our Lego block. So you can see how this kind of makes an array. So we're making an array modifier. So I'm going to run a instance on points, since I want to instance on each one of these points, a Lego block. Okay? So you can see now this count represents the length of the Lego. Similarly, we can again instance this on another line, this one going on the y-axis, and now we're arraying on the other dimension. And you can see now we have this, and it all works with the slots and the pegs and all this. And in fact, these are parameters that we want to make into parameters. I want to be able to control the x count and the y count, so now we can control it from here. So let's make this a 2x2. And you're seeing that the bevel is not working anymore. Side effect of this. What's happening here is if we look at this right here, the instance on points, you can see we're just running 2 instances. We have this as our instance, and we're copying it twice over. In other words, bevel does not work on instances. So what we have to do is we have to realize these instances. This lets the bevel work. However, we now have this intersection. It's almost as if we took this thing, right, with the nice bevel and just copied it instead of connecting them, which is a look. It's fine, but I want them to not have this seam. So what we can do is, since these are all next to each other, we want to connect them, treat them as one block, so we're going to merge by distance. And that is going to get rid of that and make a perfectly smooth mesh. So let's make a 3x2, and let's connect this up. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to duplicate it, move it up by, it should be 0.25. This one's going to be a 2x2, and you can see that fits. Shift D, duplicate, move it up by 0.25, and I'll have this be a 1x2. And you can see all of this works. Let's go a bit higher. 0.25, a 1x1, and you can see how you can you can connect these Lego blocks in a meaningful way. Now the question is, can we take a mesh that pre-exists and just convert it into Legos? That is a good question. Let me make this a bit brighter so we can see what's going on here. That is a good question, and if you guys are interested, I can tackle that in another tutorial. But other than that, that is what we got going on here, and yeah, thank you for watching. As always, I like to pimp the ever-living the ever-living shit out of my Patreon. Long story short, you can click the link in the description, get blend files for something like this. You can get early access to tutorials, exclusive tutorials. I recently made the river generator. You can get the blend for that. It's the best way to support what I do here. So if you're interested, I thank you. And that is it.